Athelflaed, the Lady of the Mercians, ruled the kingdom for over 16 years and in her own right for 7, with complete freedom and the support of her people to govern the kingdom. In an age of men, she planned and led highly successful military campaigns in desperate times when the savage Viking invasions threatened to snuff out the last vestiges of England forever.
And yet, what we know about Athelflaed, as the Anglo-Saxons actually pronounced her name, is only known at all because of a small collection of annals collectively called the Mercian Register. It praised her incredible achievements during this period and, amazingly, her brother Edward and her husband Ethelred are hardly even mentioned. The register was later edited into the pro-Wessex Anglo-Saxon chronicles, where Edward's deeds are exalted and Athelflaed's are suppressed, mentioning her only once as Edward's sister. These two texts were recording the same period at the same time. Born in 870, Athelflaed, which means noble beauty, was the oldest child of Prince Alfred, whose older brother Ethelred was then King of Wessex, dying the year after, and Aelfswith, daughter of a Mercian ealdorman. She was followed by 4 siblings: Edward, the future King of Wessex, Aethelgifu, Athelverd, and Ulfrith. There were other ladies with close variations of this noble name: an abbess of Romsey, who was Athelflaed's niece, also the second wife of King Edmund, and another being the first wife of King Edgar. By 878, despite fierce fighting and even with English victories, most of England had fallen to the Danish Vikings of the Great Army that invaded England in 865, and Mercia was now split by the Vikings. The Danes launched a surprise mounted attack on Chippenham, where Alfred and his young family had just celebrated Christmas. Many people were slaughtered, but the royal family and their core retainers only just managed to escape to hide out at the desolate and impenetrable Athelney marshes in Somerset, which Alfred knew well, but his foes didn't. With retainers guarding the family, Alfred often led guerrilla attacks on the Vikings and disloyal English villagers for supplies, and slowly made plans for a huge offensive against Guthrum, utilizing an underground network of spies and contacts of which we sadly know nothing. The Vikings were continuously hunting for Alfred and his frightened young family, and there was much that troubled the young king's mind. This was where the legend arose of a distracted King Alfred burning the cakes. Would he, successor to 3 older brother kings that had fought the invaders, suffer the horrors of the Viking blood eagle? By the end of January, Alfred had managed to gather his loyal commanders with their troops and they marched to meet the Vikings. Shield walls clashed bitterly, but eventually, Alfred won an incredible victory over the Danes at the savage-pitched Battle of Edington. The broken Vikings fled back to their fortress, pursued by mounted forces of the victorious English, wiping out any enemy they could overtake, before camping outside for 2 weeks whilst the Danes grimly weathered the vengeful siege. Alfred's Welsh biographer wrote at the time,
"And he stayed there 14 days, and the pagans had known the horrors of famine, cold, fear, and at last of despair, they sought a peace."
This peace, the formal Treaty of Wedmore, led to the creation of the Danelaw, on a northwest line which stretched roughly from London to the Mersey. Mercia gradually came back under the rule of Ethelred, Lord of the Mercians, who seems to have mostly accepted Alfred's overlordship and campaigned with him. Soon afterwards, Alfred sealed the strategic alliance between the 2 kingdoms by marrying the 17-year-old Athelflaed to Ethelred. She was thus the product of a political alliance between Wessex and Mercia, as her mother had been. But she understood the harsh realities of the Viking threat, perhaps remembering her childhood when her own father fought desperate battles and campaigns to save Wessex. It is unknown if Athelflaed had actually been taught military matters or trained with weapons under her father, but as a noble Wessex lady, although she was very well educated and spent her days with noble ladies' pastimes, like weaving, reading or beekeeping, she would ultimately have been reserved for marriage. Ethelred was much older than Athelflaed, and although their marriage appears to have been a happy one, they had only one child, a daughter, Elfwin, born in 888. An only child was unusual in an age when even noble households suffered high infant mortality rates and women dying in childbirth. So marriages were usually far more fruitful in order that at least some issue would reach adulthood. Maybe Elfwin's birth had been a difficult and painful one and Athelflaed wouldn't risk another pregnancy? But Mercia's supreme dominance over Wessex had long since faded. Its power had declined since King Offa's day due to political instability and the Viking Wars. One king, Burgred, had fled to Rome in 874, and his successor was dismissed as a mere Viking puppet by the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. Now, East Mercia was inside the Danelaw, so the kingdom ruled by Athelflaed and Ethelred was just the western rump of the old, larger and more powerful Mercia of yesteryear. Mercian women had a greater degree of freedom and participation in political matters than those in Wessex, whose royal women were not allowed to play any political role. Even King Alfred's wife was not granted the title of queen and never witnessed charters.
West Saxons do not allow a queen to sit beside the king, nor to be called a queen, but only the king's wife, because of a certain obstinate and malevolent queen, from Mercia, who did everything she could against her lord and whole people.
Essa was most likely referring to Cunthryth, Offa's queen, because in her old age she entered into a dispute over church lands with the Archbishop of Canterbury. But Mercia had a history of other powerful queens like Alfred's sister Athelflaed, wife of King Burgred of Mercia, who had witnessed charters as queen and had made grants jointly with her husband, in her own name. It is unknown whether Athelflaed would have known about the British Celtic queens in the 1st century, but life in Mercia will have been a breath of fresh air to the spirited yet grounded young Athelflaed. She certainly benefited from a Mercian tradition of queenly importance where she was able to play a key role in the governing of the kingdom. King Alfred died in 899 and Edward was crowned King of Wessex, known to posterity as the Elder. This curious nickname was coined by a later bishop called Wulfstan, to differentiate between this king and the later Edward, nicknamed the Martyr. He faced a brief, unsuccessful revolt by his cousin Athelflaed, who was only 3 when his father died in 871 and his uncle Alfred took the throne. Charters were issued by the Mercian royal couple, which tellingly did not acknowledge Edward's authority, but they also did not issue their own coinage. Ethelred soon became mysteriously ill, and Athelflaed seems to have become the sole ruler by 902. There was no challenge to her rule in either Mercia or Wessex. In early 918, Athelflaed moved against Danish-held Leicester who, now surrounded and isolated, surrendered without a fight, and most of the local Danish army submitted to her. A few months later, she moved her army north and ravaged the surrounding lands near York. Ragnall's rule in York was challenged by a group of York's Christian Vikings opposed to his paganism, so these leading men offered to pledge their loyalty to Athelflaed. But sadly, fate decided otherwise. On the 12th of June, Athelflaed died. The BBC's The Last Kingdom showed Athelflaed's character dying from advanced breast cancer. The historical Athelflaed died from an unspecified illness. When Edward heard of Athelflaed's death, he dashed to Tamworth, occupied it with his army and received the oaths of the Mercians, as well as of the Welsh. This seems very cold and aggressive. It is probable that he wanted to deter any Mercian revolt, or election of a new leader unfavourable to Wessex. Athelflaed's death was widely recorded in Britain at the time. One chronicle described her as holding dominion over the Mercians with lawful authority. The Annals of Ulster refer to her as a very famous queen of the Saxons. John of Worcester praised her, and William of Malmesbury wrote about her as a powerful accession to Edward's party, the delight of his subjects, the dread of his enemies, a woman of enlarged soul. But Athelflaed of the Mercians, and her hapless daughter, Lady Elfwin, were not erased or forgotten by time, politics or history. In the summer of 2018, Athelflaed's funeral was reenacted in front of a crowd of 10,000 people in Gloucester, as part of a series of living history events marking the 1,100th memorial of her death. Tamworth also celebrated her memory and deeds with a number of major events, including the unveiling of a new statue, the town's biggest ever piece of community art, a major commemorative church service, talks, a special guided walk, commemorative ale, and an academic conference weekend drawing academics and delegates from all over the world. A wonderful celebration of an incredible woman, centuries before Joan of Arc, Empress Matilda, and Margaret of Anjou, who achieved incredible and vitally important things for Mercia. Renowned English historian Michael Wood, expert in Anglo-Saxon studies, paid a fitting tribute when he stated,
"Without her, England might never have happened."